how you started? Well, first of all, I would like to know what moment in your life as a young person was your aha moment that you knew what you wanted to do or to be?
As a young person, I'm not sure there was one.
Well, but at some point in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember as a child being mesmerized by what I think one would call beauty, being sort of attuned to it. I remember if I took my glasses off, it made me, I'm nearsighted, so if I took my glasses off, all lights had a glow around them. And I can remember just being fascinated by the way the world looked with a glow around it. I didn't see that as not being able to see well. I saw it as seeing another way. And I still like that. I still walk around in New York, for instance, after it's rained with my glasses off because everything's just glorious. I was also very fond of animals and birds specifically. I had racing pigeons as a boy, and spent hours with them, like you would spend time with a friend. There was just a beauty to that I liked. And so I think I've always been drawn to, I'm going to call it beauty. I don't know what else to call it, but something that stands out from everything else is some kind of sparkling moment, I guess. But and as you know, when I first started making the collages, it's the same thing. I was just struck by what I thought was the beauty of this material that I was taking, and wanted to use it. And then everything just kind of became, the rest of my life from there was partially due to my interest and partially just luck. These works, these gravures, came about in a way I could have never foreseen. I never took a photography class. I'm never interested in taking a photography class. I don't really know anything about cameras except the camera that I use. And I think I might have mentioned before that many of the objects or places that are in these gravures were places that I first came across in 1975 when I was in New York. And they struck me then as being, I stopped in front of them, they stopped me, and I looked at them, whatever it might have been, a buttress, an archway, a tree trunk, stairs. Those are the things I looked at. So when I went back there to begin teaching my classes there in 1991, I carried a camera with me in my pocket. And I always go to these places as places that are important to me, and I visit them. Every time I go to New York, I try to see as many of these places as I can. It's like visiting all your old friends. And so this time when I went to these places, I would make an image. And I was very careful looking through the camera. I mean, the one thing that really mattered to me is what I saw through the camera. And if I didn't see something that, again, just my intuitive side said that's what I want, then I wouldn't take a picture. So consequently, there's not very many. And then every time I went to New York, I took the camera, and then when I went to Paris, I took the camera, and when I went to Amsterdam, I took the camera. And I had the camera with me on some occasions when I was in other places. But the great bulk of the work is New York, and then Amsterdam and Paris. I'd say of the 40 images on the wall here, probably 30 are New York, and the rest are Paris and Amsterdam. Those places, I got grants to go to those places for my expenses because I had a feeling that I would find there what I'd found in New York, which is not necessarily old things, but things that somehow stood out as being special. And indeed, there were a lot, and I shot a lot of film there. And so it was I'd love to go back. But I've been told go to Rome, but I'm afraid Rome might be too rich for my taste somehow. The simple things, the ordinary things, the things that are generally not noticed, those have always drawn my attention. Not sure why.
So you don't, especially you're not drawn, I mean, to explore. I mean, I think of you as a person who explores, and yet you keep talking about going back to familiar sort of things, because those three cities you're talking about, do you think that you could find that same inspiration somewhere else? I mean, I don't think that, well, you know,
Certainly, I can't explain why those three cities resonate for me as much as they do. And I would say I never really, I'm curious, and I like, for instance, wherever I am, I generally wander. But I often wander to places that I care about, which is especially in New York. And there's a lot in New York that I care about. But I don't really ever go looking for anything. I just don't go out thinking, I'm going to look for something today. I either find it or I don't. And I'm very comfortable with that. If I never find another thing to take an image of, make an image of, then I never find another thing. It's not anything I can force. I just can't. And I have a lot at this point, having done it for 25 years. I have a lot of images to work with. And the gravures are very slow to do. I have to collaborate. They're expensive. I can't imagine ever being able to do all of them that I already have negatives for. That said, I'm still open to it. I still see things. And then sometimes, like there's a dove coat at the Mabel Dodge Lujan house in Taos. Huge thing that was made for doves. And I'm just mesmerized by it. And I will indeed take a picture of that, make an image of that at some point. I mean, I know it's there. It's been cataloged in my head, and I will make an image of that. There's something about that that really speaks to me. And there's a few other things like that. Occasionally, if I don't have the camera with me, I'll just make a notation in my journal. I often will make a notation also of what I'm seeing, at what time of day it is, or even the day of the month, because I find that makes it's in many ways what I'm making an image of, because I always shoot in natural light, is that moment in time as much as the thing itself. All these things would look different if I'd gone back at a different time on a different day. That's one reason the winter, it works real well for me, because there's a real clarity in the winter. The air is usually real clean, real clear, and the light is real diffuse. It's not nearly it's more blue, more of a blue light, and I like that a lot.
How were you influenced to begin making photographs? And what interests you about that medium?
Well, there's certain photographers that I really like what they did, but I don't like it because they're photographers. I just like looking at what they produced, and I've thought of myself as the same, that I'm using a camera to make the thing that I can't make any other way. I don't revere photographers any more than I would a poet or a painter. There's just simply work that speaks to me strongly, and some of that changes over the years. But I was particularly moved by a large retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art the year that I was there in 1975, and it was Edward Weston's photographs, every single one of them. And I'd never seen anything quite like it. And so I was very, very moved by Weston. I've never been as interested of, let's say, some of the other, like Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams' work has never really interested me, but certainly Weston's, because there's clearly an object, a thing. The grandiose vision of Ansel Adams has never interested me very much. I like it in the paintings of Frederick Church, but somehow, to me, the frame around it necessarily limits one's vision, and it limits one's vision. Also focuses really strongly on what's there. And for me, the focus on a single object or a single vision, vista or view, for me is a really strong thing. It allows whatever that thing is to be the focus. It's not diffused through a whole landscape. There's other, very fond of the early photographers, Auger, all of his, that he would go back and photograph the same tree or the same place over and over and over, which I do the same thing. I go back to the same places. And the simplicity of his work and the nature that it's not a fancy, fussy, show-off kind of thing. There's a very ordinary look at the ordinary world by an ordinary man, and I appreciate that. There's a lot of things in the world that I like, but I guess I'm looking for the things that just knock me over. I said earlier, the things that make me say, wow, stop me. And I'm sure that a lot of people, if they were with me and they saw me photographing something, they'd say, why are you photographing that? Because it's no great event. I always liked what the critic Robert Hughes said in his book where he's talking about fly fishing. He talks about learning how to see, and he says, you know that you're learning to see when you're no longer bored by the absence of the spectacular. And I understand that. I'm not interested in the spectacular, really. I'm interested in a different kind of spectacular, and I'm certainly not bored by it. Same thing in the poets that I care about. But I have my heroes. We were talking earlier, Jackson Pollock is from the beginning, from 40 years ago. And Pollock is someone that I got it. I don't know what to say. I was talking yesterday about Monet. I mean, I saw for the first time several years ago the only two photographs that Degas took. And they're of a woman, one where she's bending over the bath and one where she's drying off. There's only two that they know of. And those just knocked me over. In fact, those photographs are really instrumental in my being interested in making portraits, photography of that nature. And when I mentioned the silver gelatin prints that I was working on, it's a separate body of work, and some cyanotypes, those are all nudes, and they all come from Weston in '75, and Degas. Most nude photography, I'd say 99.9% of it doesn't interest me at all, because there's no sense that the person inside of the body really matters. And for instance, the only people I photographed are people that are very close to me. I couldn't hire a model, for instance. It just wouldn't work. So there has to be an intimacy, just like there's an intimacy between myself and these works right here. I love all these things. It's just the best way I can describe it. I don't know if I've answered your question very well. I see a lot of contemporary photography when I'm in New York with my class each year in January. I'm simply not much interested in it. It seems to be about something else, about I would say not a fascination exactly, but an obsession with doing something that looks different, looks new. Scale for all photography in New York now, contemporary photography is very large. I simply don't care for it. It loses its intimacy. It loses its some sense of mortality of whatever the subject matter is of the image, that it has a life and death, and the photograph arrests that, stops that for us. I've always thought that and I'm probably not, this is not an original thought, but the real power of the photograph is that the moment was no longer lost, that you could have it. You could pull that photograph out of your pocket or out of a book, and you could be there again over and over and over. So you could defeat time, really. And I think that's a strong aspect for me when I look at especially, a photograph is different from a painting or a piece of sculpture or drawing, you know, it is, I hesitate to use the word reality, but it is surely rooted in our everyday experience of living more than these other things, I think. And I came very late to being interested in it. I mean, I'd already been making art for 20 years of my 40 years before I made an image. And even now, I depend on others for a lot of technical assistance and for help. Because I've had friends argue with me. I don't think I have enough time to get as good at a lot of that as some of the people that I know that I collaborate with.
Do you think that because you have done so much, you've done ceramics and sculpture and printmaking and painting and all of this, so do you think that it was a natural evolution that you go into, that you kind of moved into photography, and what is that thread that came through all of your different mediums that you work in that brought you where you are today?
You know, even in the earliest works that I had, I managed to convey some of my maybe deepest feelings through the title of the work. The title would be what that thing was about. You couldn't look at it and say that's what it was about, but so the title was meant, there's a set of etchings I did that were based on a certain kind of a Japanese screen that translates in English into whose sleeves. And it was always a screen image of kimonos without any people. And it made a really powerful impression on me in 1975. And so I did tons of etchings that were based on whose sleeves. And the reason being is because it showed the absence. That there was a melancholy to those images, because where were the people? Were they gone? Were they dead? I mean, where were they? That was the thing that drove me. And I guess that ability to convey some other set of feelings is something I began to when I made my first photographic images. I felt I could go, I mentioned this before, I could go more directly to the source and not abstract from it. I go right to it. And if people didn't see that it was in there, they didn't see it. In fact, there's no fancy titles here. They're titled what they are. Because to me, there's no need for them anymore, because and I said in my talk about memorializing, valorizing a moment in time. And I think to a certain extent, all art does that, but I think the photograph is just uniquely kind of constructed to really do that. And that's the part that's always interested me. And I think when the first images were made in 1991, I can't say why I pulled out a camera and started using it. And I don't think I even knew what I was doing at that time. And I certainly didn't think then, and I don't think now that I'm a photographer in the classic sense. I was just simply using the tool to accomplish what I wanted, which was to be able to take that thing with me and have it with me because it mattered to me. And I can do pretty good carpentry. I can use a hammer and a saw, but I am not a carpenter. I have friends that are carpenters, and I am not a photographer. But the camera allowed me to do exactly what I wanted to do, which was in a way kind of catch butterflies, to net these moments and then have them. And after I'd been doing it for a couple of years, I realized that I just felt I was basically always photographing the same thing, although the subject matter changed. And that's a hard thing to explain, because it could be just the animating spirit of a thing is what I'm looking at. And that all these things have that same animating spirit. They stand out, they kind of announce themselves to the world in a very humble way. But there are a lot of things that I've never made an image of. That I can't get in the right relationship. Something's off. I hope I'm giving you answers. I don't know. I just wander and wander. My students always they tell me how much I wander and wander, and then I say, well, you want me to stop? And they say, no, we like it. We like you wandering around like that. It can be kind of annoying.
Here's a Rebecca question. Explain, if you will, your installation decision process. This is the first time you put the entire series together, and you did not come in with a specific plan. How did you choose this one to choose to put next to each other?
I did not come in with a plan because I had your wall the wrong size. My memory of this wall is much longer than it is. And so when she told me it was 33 feet, I was like, whoa, how am I going to do this? Because I did not want to spread them out. And I'll just repeat the reason for that is that this is one work of art, and I really have never been able to see it on one wall. And so I had thought about this is what drove me to contact you in the first place. I probably wouldn't have even contacted you had I not wanted to do that. I just wanted to see them in the entire body. And I did some sketches at home. You can't, I was an architectural model builder for a while. You can't have done that without doing a drawing for everything to try to figure out with distances and had a calculator. And I thought, well, I could do 2 rows, and then I thought, well, maybe I should just be random with it. And then when I got in here, did some measurements and did a test, and I said, well, I can do 3 rows, and this turns out really well with the horizontal and verticals. The distance between them is, because I've done, as the director of the Pollock Gallery at SMU, I've probably installed, I didn't even like to think about how many shows I've installed, and I've always done them myself. So I do have a keen sense, I think, for proportion and distance and how things relate. And I didn't want them, I wanted them to be close enough that you can read them, back and forth, and they look like they belong. I didn't want too much space between them, and then didn't want them close enough. So once I arrived at this distance, which I think it's 4 inches vertically and then maybe 6 horizontally, I just stayed with it. And this is interesting because Rebecca did ask me putting one next to another. I do think about it, but I don't think about it very much. I would not put a stairwell next to a stairwell. And I wouldn't put a fountain next to a fountain. I wouldn't put a tree next to a tree. Other than that, it doesn't matter to me. There is no, we were looking at this video collaboration I did with the composers, which are diptychs. The diptychs have a different kind of sensibility because I'll never put, and I noticed this later, I always have some kind of near-far relationship. Rarely do I do 2 nears or 2 fars. And that was just something I recognized long after the fact. And also basically a light-dark relationship. So I am trying to, even though there's an intimacy, I'm trying to get some distance there by light, dark, near, far. But in these, it doesn't matter. In these, it really doesn't matter.
What about your Iceland?
Well, Iceland was 20 of these. There's 40 now. Iceland was 20, the first 20 that I'd done with Jonathan Higgins. And that exhibition came about because one of my students, I had written her a Fulbright recommendation to go to Iceland because I knew an Icelandic artist who I saw Hilder's work in New York, and it actually got in touch with her and invited her to SMU as a visiting artist and did a show of Hilder's work. And Hilder is a fascinating woman. I learned so much about Iceland from her, and I went, and then when my student went over there, she basically, what helped her get the Fulbright is she could say she was going to have a working relationship with Hilder, and that made a big difference. So she and Hilder became good friends. So the whole time they're over there, they're thinking, we'd like to get Philip over here. And so they found this venue for me. And I sent them work, and that's how that came out, and I went over there. And Hilder's been a very important person to me. I learned a lot about Iceland when I was there. I also, some funny facts, like she said, everyone in Iceland knows how to knit. And everyone in Iceland generally at some point in their life has to write a poem. And I found that very interesting. I just love the place and the people. And it turned out that the little space was just perfect because it was facing, the front of it was facing the water, which is Atlantic Ocean. It's a harbor, though, right there. So light was coming in the top of these windows and flooding this little space with the most beautiful light. And 20 gravures was perfect. You couldn't, I mean, I don't know why these things happen in life. You couldn't have taken one out and you couldn't have added another one. And it was just sort of a dream come true. I don't know, to show in a place like that. I'd like to show in Amsterdam as well, small pieces. But I'm also very interested, I would rather show in a library or a small space or something. I'm not really interested in the commercial world at all. There's not enough of a commercial value in what I do for a commercial gallery to even be interested, really. And the museum, every artist that's ever made anything would probably hope that at some point someone's going to discover what they did if it hasn't been noticed, and it may find its way into a museum. But I would most like to show work in these small spaces like Iceland or New York Public Library, or small spaces that are more based maybe on the literary part of it, because I mentioned that they're like poems to me. The Poets House in Chicago is a place I'd love to show some works, but who knows? But Iceland was a good trip. I want to go back. I could live in Iceland. It's beautiful. The people are special. The light is incredible. Fish is good.
Did you decide that you wanted to get
I decided I wanted to do gravures the first time I ever saw one, which was a long time ago. And I'd see them in books, and I would ask people about them, and they would say, you can't, no one does that anymore, you can't do that. And so I'd seen someone had said, well, try, I'm not going to mention any names here, they said, try this press. And so I got a grant from the school to pursue it. School's been very good in development grants. And I sent some negatives off, and everything they did was unusable. It was a real disappointment. And at that point, I was about ready to give up. And then someone mentioned, did I know Jonathan Higgins? And I said, no, I don't. And they said, well, he does gravures. And I contacted him. And I sent him a few negatives, and it took us a while to understand each other. I mean, one of the phrases that he always brings up is when I told him it can't be too dark. Because of course, in a gravure, it's an etched copper plate, and you're inking it. And so there's so many things that can affect the way it looks. We did so many tests of different papers and different color inks, and ended up using a custom ink that he mixed up for just these gravures. It's just Philip Van Keuren ink, I guess you could say. Because I knew that whatever, it was really important, because that would be the materials that were used to the end of it. I didn't want any variation. I didn't want a bunch to crop up one day on different paper, different ink, or whatever. So I'm hoping that, and Jonathan's much younger than I am, I'm hoping he lives a long time and I can work with him, because the gravure for me, when I first saw one, it was a lot like looking, and it's no accident that there's stone reliefs and Rodins, and it was so much, to me, looked like looking at it's something very solid. There was a solidity to it, almost a sculptural sense to a gravure. And of course, all the beginning, the earliest photographers used gravures, and I revere all those people. So I've seen a lot of them were done a long time ago. There are people still doing them. I'm not the only person in the world doing gravures, but they are still exceedingly hard to do and expensive. But I just, like one of these images, I just fell in love with it. And the same thing with cyanotype. I saw that great show at the New York Public Library of women photographers. When that show was, maybe 20 years ago. And it had I'll never forget seeing the first known cyanotype, which was by Anna Atkins, a woman that actually did the first cyanotype. And I remind my female students of that Anna Atkins did that, and they were botanicals. And I just stood in front of those things for the longest time and came back day after day to visit them, mesmerized by the color and the beauty of it. And so I always wanted to do cyanotypes kind of captured me and reviewers, because they seemed to carry a weight that wasn't there. It was something I could do to make the thing stronger, and I didn't have to manipulate or do any kind of computer manipulation. I don't manipulate anything. I said before, I never crop anything. It's full frame. But those were things I could do that seemed honest. Those were honest things, because those had a history, and it was just another way of making the image. And if I had the money, I would probably make every single one of these as a cyanotype too. And right now, the cyanotypes are, I've only done the cyanotypes. And again, I'm working with a fantastic person in New York to do the cyanotypes, because I looked and looked and looked for the best cyanotype person I could find, and he was in New York. And he is good. And that's for a particular set of nudes that I did that are only that person, and they're only in blue. And they're gorgeous, but I don't know what's going to happen with that, because he had to close his studio because he said everyone's got an Epson printer now and no one wants to spend any money on special ways to print. So that's a problem. I've done cyanotypes, but they don't look like his. And again, I'm just not satisfied with that. And I can't do everything myself. Just don't have the time. I'm not good enough at it. I don't want a bunch of half-baked cyanotypes or half-baked reviewers loose in the world.
So, what was it like working with Jonathan?
Jonathan,
Did you actually know the complexity of the reviewer before you went?
I knew a little bit about it because I'd done research on it. I knew it was complicated, and I knew that the first press that I'd gone to couldn't handle it. And so I burnt $2,000 just learning that. I did not know that Jonathan could do any better at the time, but he said, yes, he'll do them. He told me the price. And he said, that's a price to get what you and I both are happy with. And Jonathan turned out to be harder to please than myself, which is a dream come true. He would look at something and say, oh, can't use that one. And I just look at it and go, I know what you're talking about here. And then he'd show me. So we did a couple, and he sent them to me. And like I said, I've got a box full of different tests. And there was a lot of back and forth, but I knew I had the right, I knew he could do them. I was seeing exactly what I wanted. I'd seen enough reviewers. And I just liked the way, and neither one of us were in a hurry. There was no, I gotta have, we just were very cordial with each other and respectful. And so every time I got some money, I would send him some negatives, and we'd do another 2 or 4, whatever. And I think he began to, he said early on that he really liked the work and he liked what I was doing, and he said he wanted to take it on. He didn't have to take it on. I'm the only person, if you look at his website, that's doing anything like this. So he respected the work and liked it. And then after I think because I don't know, 5 years, I'm not sure how long we've been working with him. And then he just contacted me. I think his respect for me began to go up as the number of these things increased from a few to 40, because he knew I was invested in it, and he had a good sense of the imagery. And he's the one that contacted me about, when I'd like to work out a portfolio and pursue it. And of course, I was thrilled. To me, that's better than a gallery, because I'm working with an artist, a person who really understands. One is not making, not necessarily everyone is making everything just to make money. And he would really want to be a part of it. And it's a dream come true. I don't know. It is a true collaboration, and I've been lucky because I have a person who helps me with the silver gelatin that I had told you had worked with Ansel Adams and West, and he makes as good a silver gelatin print. I look at the prints that Charlie makes, Charlie Davis, and I'll often look at them and I'll go, Charlie, that's not what I saw. And he says, it never is. You know, that's the mistake most people make about photographs. That is not what you see. That's a photograph. That's an image on a piece of paper. And the nature of that is so different from the reality of, say, you sitting in that chair. But when I look at those things and I see all those values that I'm wanting, because you know, one of the things about photographing a nude is that there's this wonderful whites and darks and textures and things that change. And I really, that whole series of photographs has only been photographed in 3 locations in the world. In New York and in Taos, and there's been a few made in Chicago. And they also, I couldn't just plop somebody down here and photograph them no matter how much I cared about them. The room that they're in matters too. So there's a whole interplay of light and natural light and all that stuff. And again, I don't take very many of those, but I get these prints from Charlie, and I'm looking down on my hands and knees and say, this is exactly what I wanted. I mean, but I don't know how to do it. Thank you so much. Same thing with Jonathan. Same thing with Anthony in New York with the cyanotype. I showed Anthony first did the cyanotypes. I showed them to Charlie, who also can do it really well. Charlie said he'd never seen a better cyanotype, and this is a man 75 years old. So I don't have very many of them, but the ones I have are good. They're really good. I think the collaboration is becoming, I know in the contemporary world there's collaboration even between large groups of people that call themselves a collective is very common. And I do think there's just, the life of an artist, I'm going to use the word artist, is a pretty solitary life. And I think being able to collaborate, have somebody that understands, that's why couples that are able to be artists and be together and be supportive and respectful is such a rare thing, that you can turn to someone. There's probably, in my whole life, there haven't been 5 people that I've turned to them and said, what do you think? Maybe not even 5. Because I don't want to know what everybody thinks. I want to know those people that I trust, what they think. And there's a few people that trust me enough for that. It's one of the things I like about teaching is getting students to learn to be their own critic and not depend on what other people say all the time. It's very hard, especially the younger generation is very sensitive to opinions floating around about everything, to trust themselves. Very hard.
Do you think that your students sometimes are an inspiration to you, or a distraction?
It's never a distraction. I'm never distracted because I love being around, you know, these young people, and sometimes I would say it's not distraction. The thing there's a frustration sometimes, and because you want them to be like a funnel, and everything gets poured into this. Everything gets poured in, so they have a wide array of ideas and options and thinking to look at and think about, and not just latch onto one thing and that's who I am. And the tendency is that they will, at one point, if they're studying art, that at some point in their life, someone has seen something they've done and praised it, and all they will not let it go. But if they do let it go, they blossom. If they find their own way. I mean, I try to, you know, you're not going to forget how to do that. That's always going to be part of you. But you don't want to do that the rest of your life. You want to grow and change, and you want to be open. And one of the places that this most happens for us, SMU, we're lucky that we have our program in New Mexico, where I've taught for 25 years. Because we have a month, we have studios, we have a month. It's open studio. The expectation is it's not a class. This is your studio, this is your space. You work all the time. We're here. We own trips. They want you the first project that I give them is 100 drawings in 5 days. And I don't say anything other than that. I don't care what you draw with. I don't care if it's a fancy drawing, simple drawing, complex. I want 100 of them in 5 days. And they just go crazy. How can we do that? I said, you do it by you get to work. They have to change your notion. And then in 5 days, we do a critique, and it's astonishing. And then you can look at those 100 and you can see where they surprised themselves, because they just broke the norms, and you go, look at this. So they begin to trust the accident, the thing that they don't know. Just like with my work, I try to explain to them, and it's easy to do there too, because you can just look out the window at a large cedar tree that's out there, and I said, let's all get over here and look at this tree. And we're looking at it, and I say, what color is this tree? And they go, it's kind of a yellow-green. And then a cloud comes up. And I go, what color is that tree now? Well, it's more blue. And then something else happens. What is it now? And I said, so what's the tree if it keeps changing like this? So you're not interested in the tree as much as you're interested in time, capturing a moment of time. And you got to be real attentive for that. You got to really notice things. And they start to understand color. And they get frustrated sometimes because we'll go places. There's a valley we like to go where we spend the whole day. We picnic, we work, and they quit complaining about how it keeps changing. I say, chase the change, chase it. So what? Well, have one thing on top of another, and then when the day ends, that's where you are. And but I would say anyone who's teaching at a university right now, it's complicated because there's huge demands on everyone to have a successful career and make money. And even the students who want to study art as a BFA, which would be 60 hours, are now taking it as a BA, so that they have 30 hours of that and 30 hours of, say, business or marketing or whatever. And that's mostly driven by parents. But I've often thought that, and there's nothing to make me think that a art degree makes you any less qualified to problem solve or to be creative than anything else. I think it helps. I've done lots of different things in my life that I had no training for. And if you have a little desire to just get in there and do it. But I love teaching. I was lucky I came to it late. It was an accident. I got called to be a sabbatical replacement at age 40. I'd given up on teaching. And I was so thrilled that I worked so hard. I actually quit drinking. I was drinking too much, and I quit drinking that year, 1989, because I didn't want anything to interfere with my ability to teach. And so I did everything I could to make sure I did a good job. So I knew I wasn't going to have another chance. And so I went from adjunct part-time to full professor because I really wanted it. Really worked hard and got lucky. Got support from people.
So you said that you worked in architecture renderings, you worked in ceramics, you worked in technology, and so were those things that you did when you were in school, or were they things that you had to teach so you had to learn them?
I've never taught. Well, I teach. Gosh, it's a complicated question. I teach foundations. It's one of the courses I teach, which is now in 4 semesters, and we've broken it instead of the old 2D, 3D. We now have narrative, spaces, observation, and systems. And I usually teach one of those. And let's say I teach narrative or spaces. We use every material in the world. We use clay. We draw. We do sight. We do everything. So I'm one of the generalists that I am interested in. That's what happens in tiles too. We do everything in the world. So I don't separate them out, but we do have people that are purely ceramics. The specialist is pretty common now, but my education wasn't like that. We were encouraged to go wherever things took us. I would not teach photography. I just simply do not know enough about it, and I would not teach any kind of developed ceramics class. But I could easily teach color, painting. We do a lot of gouache and oil paint and tiles. in sculpture. When I came back from, when I was in New York in '75, what I mostly ended up doing were very delicate drawings and collages because I just didn't have the money for anything else. When I came back, I got a chance to do one of these really delicate pieces in the Dallas Museum of Art, and I did it in 2 sheets of steel that were 10 by 20 feet, half-inch thick pieces of steel. I loved doing it, but I could not support that kind of cost. And I think I kind of moved away from, well, to me, my garden is a piece of sculpture. I mean, to me, that's the sculpture I do now. And the whole piece of land has basically been transformed by who knows how many tons of rock. And I place all the rock myself. I've had several people say, why don't you hire somebody to do that? And I take forever. But to me, when I put one rock here and I have to put another rock here, I have to turn this rock 8 ways to see which way it belongs, and maybe it doesn't belong. So I get another rock. So it takes forever. And the same thing with the things that are planted. It's kind of a botanical garden in a way. And it's really a source of pleasure and delight and even solace. I'm out there every morning first thing. It's not overly organized, but I wouldn't say it's random. There's actually 4 separate gardens: the front garden, the side garden, the middle garden, 5 French garden, and the formal garden. And they're kind of connected like rooms, so you can go from one to the other, and they change a little bit.
Have you ever photographed the garden?
Not like I should. The problem with that, I think, is that, well, I'll take a snapshot. I mean, here's my peony, my special peony. But in terms, I mean, it is, I think about it all the time, but I think that should be a large format camera. Something tells me I don't have the right format for that. I especially like just the way the thing changes seasonally, the way it just, the garden is never fixed. The idea that things are not fixed, that there's a time there. And a garden is a classic example of time, the death and renewal that continually occurs. And if I have a peony that blooms profusely one year, if the winter is not cold enough, in the spring it doesn't bloom. I have to wait another year. And so you have these disappointments because how many years do you have? So you want these things to, so you develop a personal relationship for me, of all these things. And when a plant dies, it's hard on me, but I usually understand why, and I don't make the same mistake twice. But I also like the way, because I've had the garden now, there are parts of this garden that were in my garden when I had a studio on Elm Street, the old part of Dallas where there's warehouses. And I got a building there in 1978 when I came back from my first trip to McDowell. And that's where I started my first garden. And it was entirely from plants that I had harvested from vacant lots. And so I had a lot of unusual things. When I lost that lease, I dug up every single thing in that garden. And it was a space that was it was 25 by 40 feet. And it took a long time. And I would dig everything up and take it to the house that I bought. I didn't leave anything behind. I couldn't bear to leave anything behind. So I still have all that, and then I've added to it. But I do have one of the ideas in sculpture, because in gardening, topiary is primarily thought of as a sculptural form. And some of the great topiary gardens in England, for instance, I'd love to visit. So I have this notion of sculpture as a topiary. Of course, if it were really plants, it would take a long time to do it. But I've made some small bronze topiaries, little maquettes. But I haven't really pursued it like I should. But they're in the garden. There's gardens within the garden. So there's a little garden that's just bronze, a bronze garden within the garden. And I can look at it and say, what if each one of these things were 10 feet tall? I mean, how beautiful would that be? But, there's just limitations in life, especially as you grow older. you don't want them to keep you from doing anything you want to do, but you have to be real, have some reality about it. I still might be able to do one of these things.
Do you feel that with what you just said about the garden and the movement and the change and that for photography, even maybe exploring video or moving into that kind of film sort of thing would be the next evolution?
Well, that's why this piece with Jabrakli, Martina Tite, the Lithuanian, that collaboration with her as a very fine composer and using my diptychs, which I think made, it was as if the music was the musical version of the images, and the images were the image version of the music. It really came out nice. And that, I think we're going to do something else together. And I am interested in making a film. I mean, I don't think there's a artist alive that hasn't thought about making a film. And I do think about it a lot. But it's just like I read once about poetry, you know, the last thing one wants to do is add another bad poem to the world. And I would say that goes for everything. So I would want it to, I always liked what Charles Simic said about his poems, that he wants to write a poem that'll be read in 1,000 years, like the Chinese poems. You know, it's pretty ambitious. I don't know about 1,000 years, but you would want to make something that could reach beyond its time. And I don't know if it's...
Are there any artists out there that kind of, I think of William Kendrick.
Oh, I love him.
And when you were talking, I sort of see that kind of, when I first saw his work, I was just blown away by this incredible person who just wants to eat up everything. I just love his work. But when you were just now talking, I kind of got that feel of, you know, Kendrick, kind of where you sort of evolve and play and do, and I don't know where I got that.
Well, I hope that I could keep, you know, one always wants to keep growing, and I firmly believe in play. I think when you talk about Kentridge, and that last work I saw that was at the Museum of Modern Art was fast. It makes me think of something that, again, Charles Simic said. He said the attraction of a poem is, the sublime attraction of a poem is it wants to say everything. The problem is it's very hard to do. I think Kentridge wants to say everything. In a sense, I want to say everything here, or would, you know, I just, if one image would say it, I would say that's it. But I'm saying these 40 are not even beginning to get close to saying what I want to say. So there is that attraction to want to say everything. And that's what I admire in him, because that's a big task. And perhaps not doable. But one can try. I mean, you can try to do what you do. My garden has been, right now I'm trying to grow some moss, and I've got these two urns that used to have things in them that kind of flank the entrance, and for the longest time I couldn't get anything to grow in them, and I thought, what if these are just moss? And so I've been collecting little pieces of moss and getting it in there and putting buttermilk on it and spritzing it, and it's just been kind of disappointing because not much is happening, except right now something's happening, and I don't know what it is, but I go out there every day and I spritz them and I look at them, and you know, it's like a little garden within the garden, and I've got a real investment in that moss. I can't think, the word is so overused, and I mentioned it talking about Ray Carter, but the word love is, you know, Yeats said, a word, a solitary word says all, and that word is love. And I know that that's a word that, you know, has been beat to death, but it's still an incredible word. And I can't think of a better way to describe things that I'm interested in.
So, is there anything else that you
Well, I always enjoy talking to you. I don't know. I mean, I think it's important to have lots of things you miss, or else why have to come back? The one thing you don't want to miss is a good life, because I tell my students that are like, that are not don't seem to be caring, and I say, do you believe in reincarnation? Do you think you're going to have another chance? I said, this could be it. I mean, it could be reincarnation, but this could be it. So, do you really want to squander it? let's pretend that this is it. Because I mean, the one thing about myself that I think was good at finding what mattered to me at age 19 and 20, which was a time where if that sequence of events had not happened, getting married to my son's mother, my son being born, all this happening at like 19, having to get a job, having to go to work, and yet I found that thing that really, I was a mediocre student at best, but once I started studying art, like most people that really care about it, I did really, really well. And I always thought that this whole time that I'm kind of married and going to work and going to classes, and I did have the dream of just getting on the motorcycle and just leaving. That desire for freedom was something that I just didn't, I had to buckle down early. I had no choice. And I think it was real good that I started early like that. And because it took me a while. By the time I got to, say, MFA, I was older than the other students, because I was out of school for a while and had to come back and kind of start over again. So I was older than they were. And I didn't get to go out and drink at night. I had to go, So there was a kind of a regiment in my earlier years that could have just as easily not been there. And I think that really helped me in terms of having a work ethic and believing in what I did and knowing that I had done the right thing. And of course, the 70s, or as far back as I can remember, but it was a time where art was, people did art for art's sake. I mean, nobody, when I was in New York in 1975, and I heard Laurie Anderson say this in a conversation once, nobody thought about making any money. They wanted to make art. They wanted to be where art was being made. They wanted to be with artists. They wanted to do this thing that they wanted to do. The idea of fame was just not there. And now, in a way, that's all there is. The desire to be famous. And I think it's corrupting. I see pushback. Not everyone thinks that way. But the art world, the money, power of money and all that is, I think, really corrupted things. But that's just at the top. It's like the top 1% of our population makes too much money. And there's still a lot of people that believe and they're here to make something that will be meaningful and memorable. And if not in their time, in some other time, they want to make a difference. They don't want the money and all that. So I see it in the students. I'm encouraged. Anyone who's discouraged about the younger generation, of course it's a generalization, but I'm encouraged. They're bright, smart, they're sentient. What I most like is they're not taken in by advertising. And advertising spends billions of dollars trying to suck them into everything in the world. And they really see it for a lot of nonsense, for the most part. And that's encouraging. They see through that. If you drink the right beer, drive the right, then you're happy, then you're a success. They see through it. They want something real. I like being around them.
Where do you think you're going? What do you see in your future?
Wow. That's a tough one. I've never been a person to really think much about the future. I just do what's right in front of me. Somehow the future takes care of itself. I'd like to live long enough to be able to do more things that I think are valuable. I'd like to be able to, I have a grandson that's 3 years old. I'd like to, I never knew my grandparents. I'd like to be able to have a relationship with him. I should say I'd like to travel more, but I'm a reticent traveler. I get nervous, but when I'm there, I always enjoy it. So, in terms of the work, I am. Well, these three things I've got started, these three bodies of work that I'm working on kind of all the time, I really believe in them, and I want those bodies to grow and change. And so I can't see putting any of them down and like moving past it. Whatever it is I do, it'll have to be added to that. And of course, we haven't talked about the poetry, but I'm writing more poetry now than ever before because there seems to be more moments in time, instances that trigger the need for a poem. Just like these things are triggered by the need to make the gravure. I would like to see a book of gravures. I think that the history of gravures is that they were made to be in books, and I would like for them to end back up in some kind of a book. I mean, to me, that in looking at them like that is something that I would like to see in a book.
That was my next question, as a visual artist and a poet, how do those two things affect each other?
Well, they come from the same source. They are brother and sister, I guess you could say. They're born from the same needs and desires, which are to kind of, in a way, translate the world into something else. It's a translation. And that means going from one language to another. The poetry is a more, well, like I said, Wordsworth said the perfect poem is the perfect words in the perfect order. Poetry somehow is a distillation that gives one a really powerful kind of jolt of something that may, in its original sense, not have this other voice. In the same way, art does the same thing. The works of art. I mean, if I had not taken these pictures, then these things would still be anonymous in the world to a large extent. And in fact, they still are. But it's a way of just picking these moments. It's hard to talk about, really. These instances, like I'll find a dead bird in the garden, and I'll write down some things, and I'll go back and I'll write down some more, and there'll come a point where I've got a whole lot of stuff, and then I start playing with the words and the distance of the sentences and the rhythms and things when I work on a poem, it goes through 20, 30 changes, maybe more. It's real hard work for me to get it. I have raw material, and then I just have to fool with it forever and ever to get it to be more and more what it should be. That doesn't happen with these. They are what they are right off the bat. The poem is much harder work, and it takes a different part of my head, really. Because, like Simich said, I don't want to add another bad poem to the world. I want to add another bad anything. I mean, there's enough flotsam in the world already. So you want to make, something that has, makes a difference. But the poems for me are, I'm not an abstract poet. Those poems all come from some actuality. Even my separation from my wife of 2 years has driven a large number of, I think, very fine poems. And possibly out of that being the only way to deal with it. Memory and loss, longing, yearning. Those are very real things that poems are usually pretty good at dealing with. And that helps me because I don't have to just sit somewhere and grieve. I can take these experiences and I can make something positive out of it. not to be, I don't want to make a Hallmark card or anything, but there, there's a fine line between, honest sentiment and overly sentiment. I try to be aware of that. But I can't talk about others. I have to talk about myself. I have to talk about these, and often too. I mean, I was just reading. I was reading about Jim Harrison, who recently died, and there was an obituary on the front of the New York Times. And I mean, I knew who he was as a novelist, but I never read a novel, and so I got the most recent one called The Ancient Minstrels, and also in the obituary they talked about his poetry, and I thought, I never heard of him as a poet. So I go out and I ordered some poetry books, and they came in, and I'd have to say that Jim Harrison is the finest poet I've ever read, and I didn't even know the man existed. And then come to find out that one particular book is the what's the poets, the big poets, American Poets Society or something. It is the most popular book of poetry ever. And I read those poems, and they just matter to me really deeply. That I found somebody new like that, and I didn't even know about. And there's a real humility in his poems, things he talks about. But I do think that love has always been, poetry has always kind of had a need for love in one way or another, going all the way back, Shakespeare's love is not love that alters where alteration finds or bends with the remover to remove. I mean, it's like, it just is well suited to put into another form and tell a different kind of story. And so I'm not shy about using that. And you can't be shy about using anything, or else then you're just paying too much attention to what the other people think. You just can't. I mean, even the most radical forms of making art, if that's what they want to do, then they have to do it. You can't be. I always liked what Don Quixote says to Sancho Panza. He says, when love seizes entire possession of the heart, the first thing it does is banish fear and shame. And that's absolutely true. And I would say when art seizes your heart, which I think it does, it also has to banish fear and shame. And that's critical. That's why I read, so I can find these things and I didn't know about them, and I love them, and I especially use them in teaching. There's a wonderful story that Charles Simic recounts of sitting in Chicago one night late and hearing a Chicago radio person tell the story of the flute player in the pit. And he's written this whole story out, and it's in, I give it to my students in foundations, but in narrative. This is a narrative, and I want you to use this narrative and translate it into another narrative. But in the flute player in the pit, he's talking about the man had a recording in the Amazon of the flute player, and there's they put this man into this deep pit which he cannot get out of, and they gave him a flute. Then they walk away, and he's hopeless. He can't get out, so he plays the flute because that's what he knows how to do. He does what he knows how to do, and it's just a beautiful story. And Simic recounts, that he can hear the recording of the flute playing, and he says it's just haunting when you hear this person playing his flute. And I say, what's the thing when you're put in the pit of your life that you will pick up and will keep you, that you can do? Is it a flute? What is it? Things may have gone really well for you up till now, no problems, but it won't stay that way. So, you have to, this is a story that will happen to you someday. We all get in our own pits, and we all have to find our way out. And I think making art, poetry, literature, music, all these things get us out of the pit. And it's important that while we're here, we try. We try really hard because everyone else did before us. I mean, thousands of years of people making things, and no one thought they were going to live forever or not die. Didn't stop them. I'll have to send that little story to you. You'll like it.
Yeah.
I've got to give it to you. It's a perfect way to start the narrative class. And they'll even make a book. I'll say, I want you to illustrate this book. I'll show them how to make a book. And I want you to do the flute player in the pit with just images. Some of them are really, really something.
So, how many more years do you think
Till I can't.
Oh, so there's no return.
Until I can't. I'm one of the poor faculty. I can't. I need the income, and I enjoy it. If I don't, when I say can't, I don't mean not necessarily just physically, but if I'm not, I like it. Students like it. I'm good at it, and so I want to keep doing it. And but it is hard right now because all of my colleagues are retiring, one after another. And it reminds me of when I went to the McDowell colony. I didn't feel this so much the first time, but this last time I went, it was such a great group of people. And I got there, I was there for 2 months. And of course, people arrive staggered. So the first month is great because and it was a good group from every kind of field in the world. That's where I met Joe Broccoli, and I just loved it. And then they start leaving one by one every day. Another one's gone. Until there's a point where all the new people have gotten there. I don't know any of them. And it's a funny feeling. Because I don't have the time to know them like I knew the others. And it comes a time where I say, oh, I'm ready to go too. People think it's hard to want to leave, but there comes a time where you want to go too. It is life. When that time comes where you say, I'm ready to go, you want to, we all have regrets, but you're hoping you don't have too many of them. Or especially that you want to not be arrogant, you want to be aware of your shortcomings, whatever they were. I could have done a lot of things better. How much I can do right now. Try not to make the same mistakes. Try to keep my word with people. Just be good to people that you care about. Be there for them. I got that group of students that I'm very close to, even from 20 years ago. Robert in New York is like a son. He was in my first New York class 25 years ago. I just got a couple of emails while I was here of 2 students that wanted to come over and see the garden. Those things are important to me. But I like teaching. I came to it so late. I hope I have some more years. But in a way, I don't think I was ready. I tried getting the job I tried. I don't think I was ready. I think by the time, when I was 40 and I had a chance, like I said, I quit drinking. I'd been drinking heavily for 10 years. I just really wanted to do well. And I don't know that I even thought about that when I first looked for a job out of school. I've been incredibly lucky. There's an English gardener that I like a lot, and I've got his little thing on the wall, and he says his only wish in life is to have a small house and a large garden, and that's exactly what I have. So I'm a happy man.
Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you. It's been so nice to meet you and be here, and the people that work for you are so nice, and that you organize these things. I don't think, it reminds me of something that Mies van der Rohe said. You don't do a thing because you want to, you do it because it's right. And, this little cafe society, these things you do, whether you have 100 people or 4, what does it really matter? It's just a good thing to do. And you can't be discouraged about things because of numbers. It just doesn't matter. That's another.
Quality
Absolutely.
not the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, numbers mean nothing.
It's like our mentorship program, you know, it's a small number of kids that we are having a huge impact on.
In fact, you don't even know what the future impact is. That's what's, I think it's the thing you won't know that's most important. It's like the old adage about a tree is you never plant a tree for yourself.
Yeah.
You don't. Although I've got an oak tree, a white oak tree, and white oaks have an acorn that's just about the size, it's like an orange. You know, when I first bought my house, somebody handed me one, and they said, "Do you know what that is?" And I said, "No, I've never seen one." They said, "It's a white oak." And I went in the backyard and stuck it in the ground, and it came up. And it's probably not in the best place in the world, but I kept thinking, oh, when it was little, I should move it, I should whatever. And this thing's this big around now. It's taller than the house. And it has the leaf on it is like a Matisse leaf. It's that beautiful. So it's my Matisse tree. So I did plant that and get to enjoy it. But those trees, you know, they get huge. But it's sort of interesting that I can point to this big tree and say, I planted that acorn.
Are they, are white oaks normal or delicate?
Yeah, there's white oaks. There's so many oaks with that kind of leaf. Some people call swamp oak and white oak get intermixed. There's some in the creeks that run into White Rock Lake that are absolutely enormous. So they are native to the area. I've also got, when I bought my house, it had 7 pecan trees. No other kind of tree. Big pecan trees, way too close, way too tall. But I had to have, I had 2 oak trees in my garden on Elm Street, so I dug them up and brought them. One of those oaks now is this big around. I brought my 2 oaks. I planted some cedar trees, which every spring make me sneeze like crazy, but I love them. So I planted some things I didn't have, even though I had a tight space. But I love that little oak. It's the only one. Only one in my immediate neighborhood. And you can now buy them at nurseries, but used to you'd have to transplant one. And I have since found the acorns and put them in a pot and thought if they sprouted I'd plant them, but the squirrels dig them out and eat them. So the squirrels should have dug that one out and eaten it, but they just didn't get to it. Thank God they dig up the pecans, or I'd have 1,000,000 pecans in my yard. Mine are not edible. At one time before there was a time where my house was not tight, and they got in the roof one time. And, well, I got rid of them by not making any place where they could hide. I mean, eventually the whole second floor of my house was redone, so it's tight now. And when I bought my house, the back of it wasn't tight. There's no way to make it tight. But I'm hoping the house is tight now. I don't think anything can get in it now. You know, mice, whatever. I don't think they can get in. So that's one of my dreams, was to make the house so a squirrel could not get into it. You know, a little dream, a little thing you can actually accomplish. Keep the squirrels out. There are too many squirrels. But we have a lot of red-tailed hawks and sparrowhawks and white-tailed Harris hawks because of the floodplain that comes in there. And every now and then I'll see a hawk get a squirrel, and it's like, you go get them. The hawks are wonderful. There's a lot of them.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this. And I think that we have enough for,
People get enough to do something. Are you you said you might take some good photographs of this too before it comes down?
yes.